I want to go ahead and welcome you all to the 2024 UCR Staff Conference. We're so thrilled to have everyone here today. In case you haven't been in any of our sessions and this is the first one you've been able to join, I just want to do a couple quick notes. So you know each session is being recorded and we'll post the UCR's Learning Management site within the next couple of weeks. If you'd like closed captions for this session, please click on the Show Closed Caption button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And while you can use the chat to interact with us, any questions that you have, please put them in the Q&A feature. It just allows for Joanna to better send the questions our way, and we will take questions as we go throughout the presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, drop them in the Q&A. And then if you do put them in the Q&A, you also have the option to upvote questions. So if there's a more common question amongst all of you, you can upvote it to make sure that we ask it quicker. And I'm going to give it just another few seconds for people to join in. As we begin to get started, I do want to make sure that everybody is abiding by the UCR Principles of Community, and I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat. Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started. I am Brittany Fraser. I am a 2018 UCR alumni with a degree in cellular, molecular, and developmental biology. I currently serve as the purchasing and financial assistant for the University of California, Riverside in the Performing Arts Administration Unit. My main responsibilities currently include purchasing as well as contracting for performances, independent contractors, etc. I previously worked as an events manager for CHAS facilities for about 4.5 years. Under that role, I managed over 940 events a year with a small student staff of 6 students. I have an immense passion for advising and leading my student staff as well as everyone around me. Currently, I serve as a wellness ambassador for CHAS under the Administrative Committee for Staff Assembly, and I'm the current president of LEAD. I do also have a cat and I love photography. My co-presenter today is Erika Santoyo. Erika Santoyo is an assistant director for AGSM Graduate Student Success in the UCR School of Business. With over 19 years of experience working in diverse teaching environments, 10 of which in the UC system, she is dedicated to supporting and empowering students to be proactive, optimistic, realistic, and accountable as they work on achieving their academic goals. When advising, her goal is to create a holistic experience where students feel welcomed, safe, and accepted. Erika holds a master's degree in art history, and outside of work, she enjoys listening to podcasts, playing sports, and spending time with family. So we will go ahead and move on to our next slide. Today we're talking about resiliency through change. So what is it to be resilient through change? We think of resiliency through change in many different ways, so we want to be a little bit more specific in how we're addressing that today. Today, we want to focus on how to be resistant, both in our professional and personal lives, and particularly looking at how change can be looked at in a positive light rather than a negative, and how we can shift our thinking about change to working through change to simply being with the change. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Erika.
So when we think of change, change is a word that can have different connotations for different individuals. For some, it can mean change to fix what is broken or a change to stand out from the crowd. For others, change can feel overwhelming and psychologically unsafe. In either instance, we have in either instance, how we approach change can have both a positive or negative impact. One of the things that we were using was the Wheel of Change. The Wheel of Change is a model created by Marshall Goldsmith in his book Triggers. The wheel is divided into 4 quadrants: create, preserve, eliminate, and accept. When we think of create, it represents the positive elements that we want to create in our future, things to add or invent. Preserve represents the positive elements that we want to keep in our future, things to maintain or improve. Eliminate represents the negative elements that we want to eliminate in our futures, things to reduce or eradicate. Accept represents the negative elements that we need to accept in our future, things we try to delay or make peace with. If you're interested in learning more about the Wheel of Change, we can provide those links in the chat for you. There is no particular place to start with change, and it always depends on the change that you're given. So depending on where you are personally or professionally, your wheel will look very different with each instance. So as we look at change, when we experience change, it happens in different aspects of our lives. Brittany and I first presented on resilience and change back in January, but we came from a lens of what happened with change during the pandemic. But now we're 4 years out and change is still happening. It's not affected by the pandemic for the most part. And we know that change will continue to be part of our lives. From the professional lens, sometimes change isn't something that we really have a choice with. Depending on our roles on campus, the range of change we deal with can be very minimal to impact 23 levels. So that will always depend on our roles. From my experience in academic advising, change happens all the time. It can happen from one day to the other. It can happen on a monthly basis, quarterly or annual basis. Sometimes it really depends on the students that are coming to UCR. It depends on the demographics, the backgrounds. It depends on also what technology is being released and how are we going to use that technology to make sure our students are successful. Within my current role, our office has been working on a reorganization. Prior to the last 2 weeks, at the beginning of March, our office we went from academic advising to graduate success, which means we absorbed our career development center. And with that, we were 3 separate units: career, advising, and admissions. We now actually live under umbrella of graduate programming, where we have an assistant dean, and those 3 offices become 2, but now we are working a lot closer together. So from my experience professionally, when I look at the wheel of change, we started with accept. Our office had to accept. As a whole, our advising unit came together and we discussed what were the pros and cons of this reorg. We discussed our fears, our frustrations, kind of giving that opportunity for everyone to express how they were feeling. And then we had to make peace with it. We have to realize this is going to happen whether we are with it or not. One of the things that I always look at with change is I want to see, where are the tides going? Is it flowing to the left, right, forward, backwards? And I recognize that if I don't go with that tide, I'm going to be rolled by it. So being able to understand it and accept this is what's coming, and how do I make this the best outcome for me and for my team? From accept, we went to eliminate. Because we absorbed the career development office, we had to figure out what we needed to eliminate, both on that end and the advising side, because we couldn't do the work of everybody with our bandwidth. So we had to figure out what worked, what didn't, and how do we combine these different aspects of these responsibilities to be able to move forward and be as successful as we can. Then we went from that to create. For us, this was the fun part. Always being able to be creative. We had took this as an opportunity where this is something brand new. We get to mold it and build it from scratch. Taking what we can from both sides, what worked, and then figuring out and saying, okay, how do we improve and how do we add? So we came up with ideas. How do we move forward and how can we start to be successful? It gave us an opportunity to see, hey, I've had this idea for a while. Now we can potentially start to implement it. And then at the end, we went through preserve. What are the positive elements? And actually looking at, we've just reorged, what's working and what can continue to work, and now our wheel goes back from preserve back to create. And it'll move in that quadrant, those two quadrants, because now we have the ability to say this worked, this didn't. Let's go back to create. So we don't have to accept. And it may even kind of come all the way back to eliminate. And then to say, all right, this didn't work. Let's eliminate that. Let's go back into that creative quadrant to say, let's come up with new ideas. Let's bring in another unit. Let's come up with campus partners and see how we can continue to improve. A lot of times, so this is my experience, but when we think of change, some of the questions that I've always asked myself is, what is happening? How is this change going to impact my work? Is there anything new that I need to learn to be able to deal with this change? And how am I going to be successful with my new norm? Because at the end of the day, that's our goal. We want to be successful, whether it's one step, 1 inch, allowing that opportunity for us to reflect and maybe take a step outside and say, how can I be successful? And that will allow me to move forward. All right, I will pass it on to Brittany.
Alrighty, so oftentimes we focus on resiliency through change in a professional mentality, but the reality is that we all face change constantly, even in our personal lives, and this can impact our professional lives as well. So I want to start by thinking about some of the larger changes that we go through in life. And this list is in no way comprehensive of everything we deal with, but it's a start to get you thinking about what changes you go through. Looking at this, we have marriage, deciding to go back to school, changing jobs, buying or renovating a home, moving, taking care of a parent, losing a loved one, and a breakup or divorce. Again, not comprehensive of everything, just some things that I was thinking about in terms of what are major changes we go through. Me personally, in this year, I am going through 4 major changes all in the span of a 1-year time. I have changed jobs about 5 months ago. My mom moved in with me around that same time. I'm getting married in October, and I'm moving just before my wedding. So there's a lot of major shifts that are happening. But it's really learning, how do I work with that change and how do I embrace that change rather than just trying to get through it and constantly being overwhelmed and stressed. So how do we handle that? How do we go about figuring out how to navigate this change? The big thing to think about is what can help ground you? What is consistent in that change? So maybe you're having a change at work, but you're still going home to the same place, to the same people, to the same pets if you have them. So that consistency can be something as simple as a pet, a loved one. Your friends that you have, something along those lines. But having and focusing on that thing that is consistent will help to mitigate a little bit of the overwhelming sensations of change and help you to focus a little bit more on, okay, I still have that stability in my life. You want to take some time to really think about it and focus on what can be my sense of grounding. I do also want you to think about something that's called a 3-step model, and it helps you to navigate change and allows you to process the change as well. So a lot of us go through change, but we don't necessarily process that change. So you do have to be able to process it. Firstly, we need to recognize that this change is happening and that there will be an end to how we know things currently. You want to give yourself time to embrace that ending and even mourn it if you need to. Really take the time to think, okay, this is ending. It's going to be okay. But allowing yourself to process if you're not okay with that. Next, you have to look at the neutral zone. So that's kind of your space between what was old and what will be new. And give yourself the space to transition into the new change. Take it slow and allow yourself to embrace the new change. Lastly is the new beginning. This is truly taking in the change and letting this become your new normal of your life. And while this model helps us, it's not a short process, and it may take some time to go through the steps to embracing the new change as the new normal. It may take you a while in that neutral zone or even starting to get into the new beginning before it becomes the normal of your day-to-day. Last thing that I want to touch on is how to manage stress along the way of dealing with this. So the most important part of that stress management is completing what's known as the stress cycle. So Erika, if you can go to the next slide. So what is the stress cycle? Let's look at this stress cycle. So if you look at the picture that's here on your left-hand side, essentially the stress cycle is your body's response to stress. Your body kind of goes through different things when you're dealing with stress, and how you cope with that kind of affects how you're dealing with the stress cycle. So you start with the thing that's causing you stress, whatever that may be. In this case, particularly, we're looking at that change. So change is coming, it's stressful. Your body goes into a natural fight or flight and increases your cortisol levels in your body, which then impacts you both mentally and physically. That's really where we want to focus today, is once you start to go through those symptoms and start to feel overwhelmed. If we're not completing the stress cycle after that feeling of overwhelmed and after feeling those mental and physical symptoms, you're going to continue to kind of do this circle over and over and over again until it becomes too much. And it'll either be mentally, you feel like you can't take it, you'll experience extreme burnout, however that looks like for you. You have to find a way to let that stress out so that way you can actually complete this cycle and kind of start anew without it continuing on the same cycle. So how do we do that? We're going to look at this completing the stress cycle on the right-hand side of things that you can do to actually finish that stress cycle. There are 6 different ways in here. I'm sure there are many others, but this gives you a basis to start on. So number 1 is you can create. Things like knitting, painting, singing, something creative allows you to kind of get that stress out through a creative process, if that's what you enjoy. Another thing is crying. Crying is actually the body's natural way of relieving stress. I know there are some people who try not to cry, but sometimes we need to. Sometimes we need to go and have that cry and then take a breath and start over again. And that's just your body naturally wanting to get rid of that stress. Next is touch. So things of physical affection actually releases oxytocin, which can help you feel safe and connected and, again, relieve that stress. One example I like to use in this scenario is actually the Disneyland characters. The Disneyland characters, if you've ever noticed, if you go in for a hug with a Disneyland character, they won't release that hug until you do. And that's simply because they know that people are going through things. And when you come to Disneyland, again, they want to claim it as the happiest place on earth, which I know for some it's not. But they really want you to relieve that stress when you're there. And so if you go to hug a Disney character, they're going to let you embrace that hug until you feel like it's time to let go. The next thing is getting physical, exercise. It isn't limited to the gym. So you can dance, you can do jumping jacks, you can go swimming, you can, go for a walk. Just doing something that's physical really allows you to get that stress out of your body in a physical manner. Laughing is also another way. It can help you to release and express even hidden emotions. So really, having a good laugh with friends, going out to dinner, going out to lunch or whatever, and being able to laugh with people really can help you relieve that stress. And lastly is to breathe. There are many breathing techniques that are out there that you can use to just really release that stress. You breathe it in and you let it out. And I'm actually going to put a link in the resources tab at the bottom that has different breathing techniques and different methods of kind of releasing that stress. There are a lot of different ways. There's deep breathing. There's also kind of this tension and release that you can do throughout your body to relieve stress. So I highly recommend looking at the different options that you have there of things that you can do to relieve that stress. So the next thing we want to do is we want to hear from you. And we want you to really think about what changes have you experienced in your personal or work life? Were there changes that were difficult, and how did you deal with them? If you want to put it in the chat, or if you're comfortable enough to raise your hand and tell us about some changes that you've gone through, we really would love to hear from you. And how are you dealing with change? What are some things that you've experienced? I know many of us are going through the lovely change of Impact 23, and the difficulties that come with that. And it can be very hard to embrace it when it doesn't exactly work the way that all of us want it to work. I know that. Anyone? Alrighty, so Joanna, how are you dealing with that change of starting a new job? Are there things that you're doing to kind of mitigate some of that stress that you're having, or is it hard? Do you not quite know what to do with that?
Yeah, it's definitely a learning curve, and it's something that I'm continuing to grow through. So yeah, lots of emotions and lots of things to have to navigate through that change, and unexpected things, but also things that I've kind of kept on the horizon as well. Um, so it's really just a lot of it for me, I think, is navigating the emotions of the change and trying to understand what it means, and having that open communication and learning, about new colleagues and how we interact. And, it's all kinds of different things, but it's been fantastic.
Well, I'm glad that it's going well as you kind of process through that change. And I think that's the hardest part for a lot of us, is dealing with those emotions that come along with it, which is why I highly recommend, looking at ways that you can relieve that stress and really get in touch with those emotions. Sometimes just sitting down, if you look it up online, I don't have a link for it. There is something called the Wheel of Emotions. And essentially it is identifying what emotion you're having. That way you can better work through it. I see some people have gone through structural changes in their office, which I know, Erika, you have been through quite a bit yourself recently. Being sole providers for families, I know that's, a lot of stress that you have to deal with. So again, just taking the time to recognize that, taking the time for yourself. Erika, anything you want to add?
I think it's one of the things I've realized, like even just about myself and knowing yourself, is we all get frustrated, and that's okay. We all have those moments where sometimes venting allows us to kind of get those emotions out and realizing where is the root of what I'm feeling. For example, with Impact 23, again, it was a change. I am not directly affected by it because I don't deal with finance, but I do rely on our finance team within the School of Business, and sometimes things get delayed. I can be frustrated with that, but also give that myself a chance to kind of, I'm going to give myself the pity party, like the way I refer to it to myself. I give myself the grace to say, I'm not okay with this. This is not for me. And then reflect on it and say, okay, I've had my moment. This is coming. This is affecting me. How do I, even if it's one step forward, how do I support? And that could be, I have to be patient. It could be where I've reevaluated and said, okay, to yesterday was not a great moment for myself and what I said or what I did. So now how do I look at it from the other person's perspective or the other side's perspective? Why was this coming? And that allows better chance to kind of accept and move forward. But it's also having, hopefully you have someone or something that you can bounce these ideas off of, or like it's your sounding board to say, I don't need advice. I just want to say what I have to say. And even if you lead a team, giving that team the grace to let them express that. Um, if anyone's ever seen This Is Us, there's a moment where Randall and his wife always go through the worst case scenarios. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? And they kind of air them out And that kind of puts into perspective the situation where they're like, okay, it's not as bad as I thought it was. So I sometimes use that as well. Oh yeah, Jacqueline, very highly recommended, but bring your tissue.
And as Erika said, sometimes it's best to kind of go through those worst case scenarios, get it out in the open, so you're not mulling it over in your head over and over and over again. Get it out. Think about, okay, what is the worst case that we could go through? What could possibly happen? And then think back at it and go, okay, it's really not that bad.
Our minds are sometimes our worst enemies. Our thoughts will go farther to the extremes than it actually happens. So once it's said out loud, it's put more into like, okay, that sounds a lot not as bad as it did in my head. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide.
Mhm.
Okay, so as we've mentioned when dealing with change, things to keep in mind so Brittany and I kind of looked at how change affects both professionally and personally. And these are some suggestions on what to keep in mind when dealing with change. So first is, how can we handle change that's not going to be more stress on us? Like going through deciding maybe I'm going to not think about it today, going for a run, going for a walk. Like that's a non-stress inducing way to give you those endorphins so that you can come back from stepping away from it and then coming back and saying, okay, I'm a fresh mind. Let's take a look at it again. Um, Sometimes we need to quantify the change. So for example, if we're in a position where they tell us to change, putting it into logical sense, like you quantify it. How is this change affecting the whole? Where, again, what is your wheel of change? What is your starting point is really important because that allows you to kind of move in either direction to give you a sort of plan on how to move forward. I'm thinking of who will this change affect, especially with everything that we do. Impact 23 is a great example. It's affecting everybody. Not at different levels, but it's one of those things that does impact the whole. And we may not have a lead position, but we are people that are staff that or even just personally, we might be seen as leaders by others. So how do we lead through change? How do we lead through example? Sometimes if you're the leader and your group sees you struggling, it kind of puts that into perspective for the rest of the group. And it could have a negative tone. But again, it goes back to using all these other tools and even working with your team or working with those people that look up to you. And you might have to work at it together. And that's how you lead through this time. And it goes back to what I mentioned before. Who do you rely on for support through change? Is it a coworker? Is it a family member? Is it a supervisor? Is it a child or a sibling? Just looking at different ways that we can deal with it that will make it easier for you.
And I do want you to keep in mind as well that whether you're leading a team or not, and if you're dealing with personal change, it's going to in some ways affect your professional life as well. As we're dealing with that stress, sometimes it comes out in places that we don't necessarily mean it to. And so keep that in mind as well, that sometimes it's hard to separate personal and professional when it comes to our stress levels and the change that we're going through.
Okay. And that is our presentation. Does anyone have any questions for us?
You can put them in the Q&A or simply raise your hand and ask some questions. Or even share your experiences. Like I said, we would love to hear from you.
Oh.
Joanna.
I just wanted to share, we did have a question come through Q&A about a copy of the presentation. So I wanted to let everybody know that we do have a copy of this presentation in the resources tab. So everyone can access that there.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Alrighty, I know it was a little bit of a shorter presentation. I know myself and Erika, if you have any questions at any point, or you're having a hard time navigating things, we're both available. I'll go ahead and put my email down in the chat. So you're more than welcome to reach out for any reason. And I think
And one more comment coming through the Q&A here. This presentation really made me think, and it gave me a lot of perspective of where I am and where I need to go. So great feedback there.
Yeah. Trina asked if we could go back to the wheel slide. So let me just go back real quick. I'll go to that one.
Thanks. I downloaded the presentation, but I wanted to make sure I was looking at that because you talked about the wheel of change. Erika talked about it, and then Brittany talked about it. So I just wanted to look at it again on my screen before we.
And we'll say that we
it.
chose this particular wheel of change, but there's many different models of it. So this isn't the only one that's out there. So again, wheels of change look very different. For the most part, these are the 4 quadrants. They might be different words used to describe them. But I think from our perspective, this was an easy way to see how change affects us and how we deal with it. And again, it really depends on where you start your experience. It'll always be different. That's one of the reasons why we say no one's experience is the same. You may be in the same office, but if you have different responsibilities, different projects, it's going to look very different.
I want to spin this wheel, Erika. Can you spin it? See what happens? I'm just kidding.
I mean, there is an animation. I probably could.
And I did also put a link in the resources tab if you want to learn a little bit more about the Wheel of Change. And it was one of the links that we used when we were kind of researching this. So there is that as well.
I thought it was interesting. There was a presentation yesterday. Shauna from Human Resources.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, she talked about adopting change versus adapting to change. And that was the thing that I took away from that presentation the most for myself, was like thinking about how sometimes change is placed in front of you and you just have to make it work. But instead of adapting yourself to that change, sometimes you can think about, okay, well, I'm going to adopt this and make it my own instead of having to change the way I think to match what the change is about. I thought that for me, that was a really good takeaway.
The acceptance is always sometimes the hardest.
Yeah, it's just like tweaking that word from adapt to adopt is really is going to make a difference, I think.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because our staff is really like, we are our jobs. Like it's a joke in our office, we don't work in higher ed for the money. Like, we really care about our students. We care about the future of the university. And yeah, I mean, adopting change, it happens, but we're here for the people here. And sometimes being able to understand that when we think of change, it could be scary because it changes our perspective on, we might look at it from the lens of, this isn't good for my students, or this isn't good for my office, this isn't good for the university. But adopting it, as was said before, it changes the mindset where, okay, we are adopting this. I'm going to make this my own. And how do I use my experience and my knowledge to continue that success? for the people that I need to be successful for, and then move through that. Like, I think for me, it's really, when I look at the wheel, is my goal is to always get to create to that particular section, to say, I'm here, but I'm going to move to create, whether it's through eliminating or whether it's through preserving. If I can get to create, then I have the opportunity to bring up these ideas. I look at our staff performance evaluations. When we get to that create point, it's that opportunity for me to show not just my department or my unit, but the university as a whole, my ideas and how I can work with others to bring these ideas to the forefront to make our university successful and put ourselves on the map. But in order to get there, we have to go through the other three. And that's when it gets like, do we go through the trenches? Do we go through this just to get to that open clearing?
And sometimes change is just about embracing that uncomfortability. Sometimes to get to where we want to be in the long run, we have to embrace a change that we may not necessarily enjoy in this moment, but it's going to help us to get to where we are. And I can speak from personal experience. I've only been at UCR for 5 years, and my end goal is leadership in some way, shape, or form. And part of that I understand is understanding and learning the financial side of the campus. And so it may not necessarily be where I want to stay, but it's going to help me to get to where I want to be. And so it's embracing and, like you said, adopting that change for now to help me get to where I want to be. Alrighty, well, I want to thank you all for being here. As I said, if you have any questions or anything comes up outside of this, please let us know. We are definitely here. And lastly, I want to say that I hope you all enjoyed your time with us today, and I hope you've enjoyed your time with the conference. As you know, our goal is to keep the UCR Staff Conference 100% free to attend, and we couldn't do that without the support of Staff Assembly, LEAD, Human Resources, and EOD, and Schools First Credit Union. It's really been the partnership amongst those sponsors that has made this conference happen 100% free, not only for our UCR staff, but across the UC campuses. As a reminder, the conference will be uploaded to the UCR's learning management system in the following weeks. For now, temporarily, everything will be housed in this registration page and in the lobby of the conference for a while. So if you missed sessions, please feel free to go back to the lobby and check out those recordings. And just some quick reminders, we do have our in-person closing ceremony coming up at 2 o'clock. So in just 20 minutes, we're going to be over at the Alumni and Visitors Center. If you would like to join us, please fill out the RSVP form. I'll go ahead and put that in the resources tab right now. LEAD is open for nominations for our executive board right now. Our president for next year will be Tanya Wine, and we're very excited to see what next year will bring. If you would like to nominate someone or even nominate yourself to be part of that executive board, the link is in the resources tab. Staff Assembly is also doing their elections the first week of April, so please apply and then vote when that opens up. You can find that at the staffassembly.ucr.edu/elections page. And then you can also sign up for the EOD listserv. You just need your name and email, and you can fill that form out that I just put in the resources tab to sign up for that listserv. And being that I am the current president of LEAD, Erika is the director of administration for LEAD, I just wanted to drop in the LEAD website into our resources tab as well. So thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. If you want to stick around and ask more questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them.